All right, so in this video, I'm going to lay out a 6-step kind of self-healing trapped energy release technique that I've been working with and having some success with. That should only take a few minutes to lay that out. And then afterwards, I'll try to lay out the theory or my theory behind why I think it works and how it kind of taps into kind of different levels of things. So going right to the technique, the 6 steps, I'm just going to lay them out in the beginning and then kind of try to chart them out a little bit in a little more depth. So the first step is recognize thinking. The second step is trace thinking to feeling. The third step is to soften around feeling. The fourth step is to expand awareness out throughout the body, right? The fifth step is to expand awareness to the environment. And then the sixth step is essentially to surrender, right, and let the whole process go. So let me run through each of those steps a little bit. I'll use my whiteboard here to kind of try to lay it out a little bit, sprinkle some kind of tips and stuff that I've had in there. At the end of laying out the technique, I'll lay out a few kind of tips, things that I've seen along the way to kind of help flex it, and then I'll go into the theory. So the first step, you kind of draw my little person here. The first step is to notice that we're thinking, right? So a lot of times in our life, various times throughout the day, we're out in thinking land, right? Imagination world, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, thinking about alternate ways the present could be, or just kind of escaping into a random little pinballing of thoughts. And so our first step, right, step one, is to recognize that that's what we're doing, right? That's it. We just recognize that we're thinking. And a meditation technique, the Vipassana technique that's popular in America, my understanding is essentially that's the whole technique, is you're meditating, you notice that thinking is occurring, and then you either just recenter on the breath or you just label it thinking and move forward, right? So that's the first step we're going to do, is we're going to notice, hey, some amount of my intention or attention is kind of lost in thought land, and so I'm just recognizing that. Step two is to trace the thought to a feeling. And so what I found is that anytime we're thinking, right, especially if we notice we're thinking kind of compulsively, we're thinking in kind of an escapist way. I'm not talking here about deliberate strategic thinking, like, hey, you've got a plan that you're trying to execute, or you're trying to plan a trip or something like that. I'm talking here about kind of idle thought that we're just kind of looping in our mental hamster wheel. What I notice is usually when that's happening, there's some feeling, I'll use the red pen here, some feeling or sensation somewhere in the physical body, right? I get a lot of them in the throat, I get them in my ribs and my chest, I'll feel them in my face or in my head, sometimes even down in my legs. And so what we want to do is we want to trace that thought back down into wherever that feeling is coming from, right? And two little metaphors we can use here. This is the smoke. This is the fire, right? We don't want to get caught up in the smoke, right? We want to get down to the root of things, the fire, and address the root. Another metaphor we can use here, we could think of this as kind of a radio antenna, right? Boop, boop, boop. And the thought is kind of like a little radio speaker that's pumping out the noise, right? We want to get away from just the outcome and get down to the root cause or to the source, right? And so kind of a tip for doing this is, right, we've recognized the thinking, and now what we do is we kind of bring our attention, our intention back into the body, and we're feeling for tightness, we're feeling for pain, we're feeling for throbbing, we're feeling for roughness or friction, something in the body that just doesn't seem to be seems to be disagreeing with the rest of what is. So step one, we recognize thought. Step two, we've traced thought into feeling in the body. And you know, it may be tempting here to try to be perfect and to go, okay, I'm going to try to find exactly where this thought is coming from in my body, but that's not really necessary. If all you do is bring your attention out of thought into body, right? Bring your intention as well, out of thought and into body. And you find anywhere in your body where there's any kind of disturbance, I think you're doing yourself a favor and taking a step toward healing. Okay, now step 3, right? Let me erase my little antenna here. So step 3 is going to be to soften around the energy. So what we want to do here is we don't want to go in and attack this, right? We don't want to try to drive it out. We don't want to try to pull it out like it's a sliver or a splinter or anything like that. We want to take a compassionate, healing attitude toward it. And the way we're going to do that is we're not going to focus directly on the energy itself. We're going to kind of go into the periphery, the vicinity of the energy. And what we're going to do is we're going to feel into that zone, and our intention, right? So our attention is going to be feeling into that vicinity, and our intention is going to be, I am softening, right? I am softening. And notice I'm choosing that language because what we don't want to do is treat this as some object separate from us, right? We're the exterminator, it's the pest, and we're trying to get rid of it, right? That's just going to reinforce a negative attitude, not going to lead to any healing, and likely drive us back into thought. What we want to do is we want to have this intention of softening around it. And kind of the model you can have here is, think of this energy here, right? This trapped energy in the body. So I'm kind of taking this and expanding it out. Think of it kind of like a fish that's trapped in a swamp or a little pond. And it's a big fish. It's a fish that wants to be in the ocean, right? Say it's like a salmon or even a tuna or something like that. But it's trapped in this confined area, so it cannot thrive. It's constantly bumping up against the borders, doesn't have the fresh water it needs, doesn't have the resources it needs, so it's agitated, it's stressed, it's upset. What we want to do is soften this little dam that's built around it, right? Which is a dam of tightness and constriction and fear in the body. And we want to gradually soften it so that this fish has an ability to get out into a more expansive area that's more suitable for it. So in step 3, what we're doing is we're again bringing our attention to the area around the energy, and our intention is, I am softening. I am softening, right? We're not trying to point at something else and saying, you soften, right? We're saying, I am softening. Now in step 4, what we do is we now expand our awareness, right? Our attention and our intention out to the entire body, right? So we were up in thought land, then we were right around the feeling, and now we're moving out into the whole of the body. And there's any number of ways you could do that. You could just say, I am body, right? That could be the statement of intention, I am body. And then what we're doing with our attention is we're trying to feel the body from within as thoroughly as we can, right? So we may start by going to the bottom of the feet, the top of the head, and the tips of the fingers, right? And we may see if we can feel those 3 spaces at once, or those 3 spaces in alternation. And the purpose here, what we're trying to do, remember I talked here, picture this fish trapped in this tank or this pond or swamp that's too small for it. We're trying to soften that edge so we can get out. Now what we want to do is we want to expand our attention to the body to essentially allow the entire body to be the pond in which this trapped fish can swim. We want to give this thing space to roam, flex its muscles, right? Get some fresh water going through its gills. Basically allow it to rediscover the experience of flow and freedom and thriving. And so we've now expanded our attention from the vicinity, right, to basically the border of the body. And we're bringing our attention and our intention to occupying this space. One little thing I've noticed here, this was an important move for me to make, and one I have to remind myself to make, because it's easy if you get stuck on step 3 to just start obsessing over this, right? Obsessing over, am I softening enough? Is this thing moving yet, right? And that has a way of essentially kind of recreating the same trap that we had before, because we're stiffening, our attention is too fixated on one area, we're spinning or looping too much here. So to avoid that, that's why we make step 4, which is moving out to an attention in the entire body. We're going for a more expansive or spacious way of being. Now, step 5 is where we then flex outward to our environment, right? So we may notice, for example, that there's a tree over here, right? We may notice there are clouds in the sky, right? Birds around them. We may notice, hey, there's another person, right? A group of people here. We may notice that there's a smell of a barbecue cooking, right? We may hear, right, sounds of voices. So basically what we're trying to do here in step 4, we were engaging our inner sense, right? The feeling of the body from within, right? Now we're trying to gauge our outwardly directed senses, right? Our sight, our hearing, right? Our smell, our taste, and our touch and our feeling, right? We can feel the air on our body, right? We can reach out and touch something in our physical environment. So the intention here is I am environment, right? And the attention is attention directed through the outwardly directed senses. We are actually looking out, hearing out, feeling out, smelling out, tasting out. And again, the goal is the same. We started here, we expanded here, and now we're trying to expand all the way as far as our senses can go. The purpose being, I think there's 2 purposes always working here. One is to give this trapped energy as much freedom and space as possible. Remember, this thing has been confined. You know what it's like when you're driving in traffic? Maybe you've been stuck in stop and go for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and then all of a sudden the road opens up in front of you. Instinctively, that foot just goes down on the pedal, right? You can feel some energy surge through you, and it's like, all right, let's go, let's move. That's what we're trying to give to this energy that's been trapped here. We're trying to provide it as much broadness and freedom and latitude as we can. The second benefit here is we're now, think about what we've done. We've gone from being stuck in abstracted thought, we've regrounded ourselves in the body, and now we're moving our sense of, even just our sense of what we are, who and what we are, out of I'm a thought into I'm a location in the body, to I'm a body, to I'm an environment, right? We're getting into a notion of I am, right? That goes beyond our private concerns, right? In our private area, to be very expansive. And then step 6, right? Step 6 is we surrender. We let it all go. Right? This is an Etch-a-Sketch, we shake it. We take it back to nothing, right? If it's a whiteboard, we erase it. Because a trap here is to see this as a project or a task, and then immediately what the ego will do is it'll turn back, it'll wind back time and say, okay, how did I do, right? It'll do an evaluation or an assessment. And then it'll start criticizing, start trying to optimize and stuff like that. We want to outsource that job to the intuition, right? The intuition is better than the discursive mind, the ego mind, at seeing the deeper patterns, right? What we want to do is just do this, right? Do this, and each time we surrender. And we trust our intuition and our awareness and our recognition over time to begin to tweak and optimize the process on more the subconscious level, because it can see in intricacy and detail that ego discursive mind cannot. So how do you do this step 6, this letting go? It's as simple as, right, I surrender. That could be our intention, right? I let go. Right? Michael Singer, right, says I relax and release. That's a good one. And what we're really trying to do here is essentially open the heart. We're trying to allow the heart, right, to take information in about what happened, right, so that in the future maybe we do it a little bit better. But more importantly, what we're trying to do is get out of our heads, not go back into the thinking loop we just got out of, and just at least momentarily be free ourselves, free from thought, free from projects, free from feeling like we have to move from one step to another. We're giving ourselves and that trapped energy as broad a latitude as possible. What's the latitude we're giving it here? We don't even define it. We don't even say where our border ends. We don't even say what I am is confined by. We just say, I surrender. I let go. And, when I do this, sometimes I get a little dramatic. I surrender. It's like you're jumping off a cliff or, free diving or like diving in Acapulco or something like that. And that can be fun, but, that also can be an ego game and be a little distracting. I think the simpler and the humbler, the better. One technique I've used that I like is to think of yourself as the breath's air. Be the breath's air. right? So we've got our nose, right? And we don't think of ourselves as the nose and the face. We think of ourselves as the air that goes in, right? And then the air that goes out, right? That's how the surrender is, right? We've surrendered even thinking of ourselves, right? As I am. We accept that I am includes the breath, and that I am as much that breath going in and out, as much that air going in and out, as I am the body that I always identify myself with. And so if you just have that thought on step 6, I surrender, breathe the breath's air. That's it. That's step 6. Okay, so those are the 6 steps. Let me give a few coaching techniques, little tips that I've picked up along the way, and then I'll move into the deeper dive into the theory. Okay, so a couple tips. First, right, is don't obsess. And this goes for this technique, but really for any technique you're using. It can start to have diminishing returns and even negative returns and backfiring if we turn it too much into an obsessive project, right? Because then what are we doing? We're kind of turning it into a task. We're turning it into something we can either succeed at or fail at, right? And now we're kind of getting more into that ego energy, that scarcity energy, that zero-sum energy, right? And this is what usually drove us to thought in the first place. That's usually what led us to trap that energy in our bodies in the first place, feeling like, oh, it's too much, I can't handle it right now, I just want to kind of get out. And so when you're doing this technique, I know, all these tips I give are basically things I've learned from my mistakes. And a mistake I've made is I do the technique and I'm like, again, right? Because it felt good. And I'm like, wow, this technique worked. It helped me. But the more we kind of do it over and over and over, it's like a food you like, you start eating it for every meal. It starts to lose its magic, starts to lose its charm. So don't obsess over it. Don't fixate over it. This or any technique, do it, enjoy it. And then as soon as you notice that it's not really working for you, give it a break. Put it on the shelf for a while. Tuck it in the drawer, and then let it come back to you when it's time. A second technique, or a second little tip I'd say, is you can break it into parts. Right? If you think about how, I used to take piano lessons, and each week my teacher would give me, okay, here's a piece of music. When you come back next week, I want you to play it for me. And what you learn very quickly is you don't try to do the whole thing at once. Right? You may study the whole thing at once to kind of get a feel for its character and how it moves, but then what you do is you chunk it up into pieces, right, into segments, and you try to master each segment one at a time. And it's the same thing if you're trying to learn like a long dance move. In sports, if you're trying to learn a sitting technique, you see the whole, but then you break it into parts. You try to master each part, try to master the transitions between them, and it's by doing that partial mastery again and again and again that the whole kind of finds itself. And so what you could do with this is you might say, okay, I've done that full technique. I don't want to do it, right now, the whole thing. I'm just going to do step 1. I'm just going to recognize that I'm thinking. Right? Maybe I'm going to do that 10 times in a row. Right? The next 10 times I notice a thought, I'm going to recognize thinking and I'm going to stop there, right? And you can do step 2, right? Same thing, step 3, step 4. And so you can practice them in isolation. That way, when you go back and you're doing the whole cycle, each little part gets stronger and stronger the more you practice it. And, one of the issues here, and this is going to kind of bleed into step 3 or the coaching tip 3, is, a lot of times when we do these techniques, the first few steps get a lot of practice because we always remember to do those, but distractions happen, we lose our train, and so those later steps sometimes don't get used as much, and so those muscles are a little weaker, those techniques aren't quite as refined. And so really allowing yourself to work on all the parts, including those last steps, which may get neglected when we're trying to do the whole process, can make the process better. And then step 3 is kind of piggybacking off of that, is to flex the order. Right? So I ran through steps 1 through 6, and I think it does have a certain flow to it, right? A certain kind of theory that works, right? Kind of an inward and then expanding. But you really can master this, because the goal is to make this process subconscious and then unconscious. You want to make it kind of like riding a bike or driving a car. You want it to be something that you can do without having to fully pay attention. Because let's be honest, right? When you're sitting on your meditation cushion, right, or you've got a free moment on the bed and you've got 10 minutes to really work on things, then you really can do this technique and do these other things I'm talking about to master it. But that's not most of our time. Most of the time we're noticing, we're thinking, and we're in the middle of something else, right? We may be driving, we may be talking to someone, we may be engaged in a task. We may just not have the time or the energy to do this deep work. And so if we allow ourselves to just do one part of it, or we allow ourselves to flex the order, right? So I notice I'm thinking and I actually go to step 6. I just surrender. Right? Or maybe I don't notice I'm thinking. Maybe I feel the part in my body first. But instead of feeling the vicinity, I go to my environment. I engage my senses, right? My seeing, my hearing, my touch, my taste, my smell. And so by doing this, we actually allow the technique, I think, to reach its full potential, which isn't some kind of militaristic lockstep 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's really a series of smaller techniques that kind of flow together. And the better we get at knowing each technique on its own, at working on the transitions, and getting comfortable with doing it even out of its normal order, I think that's when the technique can come into its fullest and deliver the best results for us. And what we're hoping for, right, going back to our little drawing, our goal is to make it so that those trapped energies eventually can kind of swim in the ocean of energy that is the universe, right? Instead of having it walled up inside of us, right? It's now free to go wherever it wants. And because of that, it's no longer agitated and bumping up against the borders of our body, causing that disturbance, which then tends to drive us into thought land. Sometimes it's just an escape from the pain and the discomfort that's causing here. The more we can free this and let it go, gradually the softer it gets, and the softer it gets, the gentler it gets, and the gentler it gets, the less pain there is, until eventually, hopefully, it can be completely liberated. There's no knot at all in that space, and now we have free-flowing energy through our body, and we're less tempted to try to escape it in thought land. Okay, so I think that's all I want to say about the technique. So if all you have time for now, or all you came for was the teaching technique, that's it. What I'm going to move now is to kind of a wider ranging exploration of what I think this is tapping into on the deeper and maybe unseen level. So as I often do, I'll kind of recenter in my sense of kind of the metacosmology, right? We are physical beings. That's lowercase I is the physical being perspective. I believe we are also spirits. That's the uppercase I. These spirits, I believe, are aspects of God. You could think of it as kind of apertures within God through which God experiences God's self. And if you're interested in this, I have other videos that talk about this in a lot more detail, so I'm just going to do kind of a very Cliff Notes version of it here. And then oneness, I draw a line around it, but of course oneness has no line around it. It is everything. Is the state of pure potential from which these physical manifestations arise. And what I often will do is I'll take this, right, that's to kind of show their relationship, their relativity, and I'll array them in a circle. Now at E, that stands for environment, and that includes the body, right, which is physical environment. And so looking at it this way, what we have is we have a disturbance, right, that's showing up in the physical body, right, that is tempting us to go up into thought land, right? And so what I think is happening here, let me actually use my own technique and catch my breath here for a second. So what happens here is we're stuck in a loop, right? We're feeling pain, so we go up into thoughts. We notice we're thinking, we notice we're detached from our environment, and so we come back in. But when we come back into the environment, we feel pain, so we jump back out again. So it's kind of like a frog that's in boiling water, but what do they say, out of the pot into the frying pan, something like that. We're kind of jumping from one unsustainable zone to another, right? We've got pain that's too much to handle. Jump into thought to get rid of it or to avoid it, But we know thought is imagination land. It's not real. Our lives are happening. Our loved ones are asking for us. Our body's asking for us to care for it. So we come back, but then we come back to pain and we leave again. So what we're trying to do is to break this tight coil, right? Break this loop and allow more energy, right? And more intelligence, really, to bear on the situation. So when we do step one, what we're doing is we're going from thought back into environment, right? So we're getting back into the circle, right? This is kind of our circle of virtue, our circle of healing, our circle of life, our circle of really reality and actuality, right? So we're out of kind of this abstracted space, which, very brief side note, I think thought is kind of like a mishmash jumble. Like if you imagine each of these as like a radio station, thought is like getting a bunch of them at once. So you're getting these weird mishmashes and things like that, which the mind will then order, right, as best it can into something coherent, but it's often incorrect or wrong or something like that. My theory on that, and this admittedly is a bit of a tenuous early theory, is that it's some kind of distorted mishmash of otherwise coherent sources that gets jumbled and then recohered incorrectly. Okay, regardless of that, right, step one is we're going from thought land, the abstraction, back into the environment. But then to avoid getting stuck in the loop of going back into thought land, we then do step two, right, which is committing to feeling the feeling, right? And again, we're not going to get stuck here. We're not going to obsess over it. But step two is going to at least take us, right, maybe I misspoke. Step one showed us we're out of our environment. Step two gets us back into our environment. Okay, now step three, right, what's step three? I am softening, right? I am softening. And so what I think that's doing, right, is that is preventing this tightening action we have around this escaping action, right? And it's broadening our sense of self. And it's reminding us that we're not passive actors here, right? It can, as we're going through these loops of pain, ow, escape to thought, I'm lost, come back, right? It can start to feel kind of like we're a pinball, right? Like we're just a passive agent kind of getting batted around by the forces of nature. When we reestablish our intention of I am softening, we are reasserting our ability, right, to set our intention and our attention, right? We're kind of taking back the reins of our experience, not in a controlling or domineering way, but more in an empowering way. And we're saying, I am softening, right? I am softening. And what we're doing there is trying to invite our perspective and our environment to be in more harmony with each other, right? This intention of being soft, right? And another one I like to use here is soften, lighten, open, softly, gently, tenderly. We're basically trying to reestablish a relationship between this perspective, which sets the attention and the intention, right? Right? Where am I attending to with my focus, right? And what kind of attitude, right, or outlook am I bringing to it? That's what this perspective has the experience of, is essentially feeling in control of setting the attention and setting the intention. And if we build that around softness, right, instead of around anger or madness or flight or fight, right, we're kind of reframing the situation and inviting a more harmonious relationship between this perspective and its environment. Then when we go to step four, right, I am body, right, now we're able to get these two going. Because with this perspective, right, this is the perspective that we have when we think of ourselves as being just human beings. And I think we can look at our society the way we are with our phones and our screens and our media content and stuff like that. We really have this kind of addiction, I think, to identifying ourselves simply as mental operators, right? As kind of this choice architecture, this little person in the head, you know, almost like the captain in the ship up in the bridge who's directing everything. And when we say I am body, we're acknowledging that, yes, I am a being that experiences being able to direct attention and intention, right? To reset my focus on something if I want to, and to kind of reset or adjust my attitude if I want to. But then we also acknowledge, hey, I'm not just that. I'm also this body, right? I'm also this hand, right? And I'm the blood vessels moving through it and the bones moving through it, right? That is an aspect of what I am, right? That is part of what I am. It's an accurate description of what I am. And so notice, right, just as we were trying to expand around that energy, right, each step is basically an expansion and expansion and expansion to give that trapped fish more and more water to swim in. Each of these moves, if we look at it this way, is essentially trying to expand this inner relationship from this loop into dances that incorporate more and more of what we are, right? That's kind of the theme I'm going for here. And so in step 4, we're allowing the spirit, right, and the physical being, that, right, the aspect of us that identifies as being the being here on earth, right, operating our bodies in time and space, with the spirit, which I believe is beyond time and space, and essentially projecting its attention and intention into the physical world and creating all of this, right? We allow that expansion, right, that broader sense of self, to bring these two into a sort of dance or a harmony, to establish a connection between them. When we do step 5, right, I am environment, right, you can see where this is going. Now we're trying to bring the spirit and God into harmony, because the way I conceive of things is God is everything experienceable, right? God is, in my conception, God is the creator and the created, the experience, the experiencer, the experienced, the experiencing. It's all, all the ways you could kind of conjugate it or flip it around. Everywhere you look, it's God, right? Everything in the environment is God, including the spirits, including this. These are aspects, or kind of, if God's the jewel, this is maybe a facet on that jewel, would be kind of an example of that. So when we say I am environment, now we're going beyond what we usually think of as ourself, which may end at the border of our skin, and we're embracing a larger concept of I am, right? That I am all that my body can actually experience and see through my senses, right? I am that tree I can see, right? I am those birds I see in the air. I am the ground beneath my feet. And when we're doing that, again, it's the same move. We're taking what was a confined, cramped sense of who we are and what we are, and we're expanding it outward, right? This is allowing that trapped energy to have more space. It's also allowing our mind to have a more flexible and broader place to play in, right? A broader place in which to conceive of itself, to try to prevent these tight loopings from happening. And then what's the last step? Step 6, right? Surrender. Right? This is where we then allow the God self to reconnect with the oneness self. Because in my conception of things, oneness is not physical, it has no space, it has no time. It's essentially a state of pure, unrealized potential. And it's the state of pure, unrealized potential from which everything is constantly emerging. And so when we surrender, when we allow the I am to no longer have an object, right? So I am softening, right? I am body. I am environment, right? We were always saying I am and then giving it something. When you surrender, you're really just saying I am. And even beyond that, you may just be experiencing Raleigh, right? Not even thinking about an I or an am. This is getting into and kind of evoking that state of oneness, which is a fully unrealized state. And so we actually move beyond the physical into this more, you can call it an ethereal realm, but it's actually not even a realm at all. It's kind of an impossible, thing for our primate minds to comprehend. I think at best what we can do is kind of analogize toward it and hint toward it. But when we do this step 6 of surrender, we're now bringing the God self and the oneness into harmony. And so what we've done is we've gone from being in this abstracted dreamland, which is, again, in my theory, kind of a mishmash jumble of these that we try to retranslate but always somehow get wrong, right? To being in a loop between those, right? to getting back into our kind of seat of power, right, our seat of attention and intention, out into a sense of our full body, out into a sense of our full environment, and then finally surrendering all of that back into the oneness we are. So I think when we use this technique, what we're really doing is reconnecting with the fullness of ourselves, allowing our minds and allowing our energy to kind of run this broader circuit, kind of like if you spent weeks and weeks stuck in a room of in your house, right? Maybe you were sick, maybe you were in a deep depression or a deep funk, and all you ever saw were those walls of that room, right? Whatever artwork was hanging in there, whatever your bed sheets were, whatever furniture you had in there, that's all you saw, right? That's kind of being here. And now imagine that what you do is you go outside, right, to the other rooms in your house, right? Then you leave the house, right, and you go out into your neighborhood, right? And then maybe even get in a blimp or something like that. You fly around the whole world in a hot air balloon or something like that. Think about how freeing that would be. Think about what a difference in perspective that is, from spending weeks and weeks kind of coiling around the same environment to having an environment that literally you cannot see the end of the horizon of. And I think when we do that, we free our minds, we allow new ideas and new outlooks and new perspectives to come in, to kind of break the dams that we have inside, allow that kind of swampy, stagnant, stale water to get refreshed, right, and to become like a big roaring river pouring into an ocean that we can't see the end of. And when we do this, we really give ourselves the gift of freedom, and we give that trapped energy inside of us the gift of freedom as well.